Reginald Faraday and the Halloween Specter. Edwin Treswell had trusted in his own cleverness. His arrogance had carried him through the forging of 3 bonds in the Bank of England's name, and that conceit betrayed him when Reginald and Charlotte traced the final forgery back to him. He had run on a damp October evening, cutting through Smithfield and plunging into the gates of St Bartholomew's Hospital. Reginald was close on the fugitive's heels. As he ran into the side door, he saw Charlotte circling around the back. Between them, Treswell had no way out. As he entered the hospital, the sharp tang of carbolic struck him, stinging his throat. Doors lined both sides of the corridor, all painted with the same pale green, all shut. He paused, unsure which way to turn. Treswell had run ahead, but there was no sign of him now. The detective scanned the space, looking left then right. He held his breath, listening. The hallway was still filled only with the hiss of gaslights burning above the thresholds. One latch stirred. The brass lifted, though no hand touched it. Reginald exhaled. "Thanks," he said to Percival as he rushed through the entrance into the stairwell. He climbed. The air grew warmer, thick and damp, and at the top a door stood ajar. Beyond it stretched the roof of the laundry house. Ropes crisscrossed the area. White cloth hung dripping from them in rows. Sheets, shirts, bandages, and chemises moved in the wind, first bulging forward, then snapping flat. Treswell came into view, forcing his way through the cloth, knocking the ropes wide, leaving trails of water and linen in his wake. Air burst from his chest in ragged gasps. Reginald chased after him. The sheets slapped against his face, whipped his arms, clung to his coat, but he pushed on. Ahead, the forger stumbled. A knot of lines jerked together, drawn by Percival's unseen hand. They slapped across Treswell's chest, knocking him back. He fought, cursed, kicked, but the linen wrapped around him. The man went down, rolled toward the roof's edge, and would have gone over if Reginald had not grabbed his arms. Treswell was trapped, bound fast in wet sheets, his hat dropping to the courtyard below. Charlotte came up the stairs at that moment. She paused at the sight, their fugitive trussed like laundry, dripping and gasping. Reginald on the man's back, forcing him to the ground. "Well done," she breathed. "You've caught him." The forger was handed over to the constable, still dripping from the laundry that had held him fast. The rogue apprehended, Reginald made his way home through the thickening fog and dropped into bed. It felt as though he had just closed his eyes when 3 sharp knocks rattled his bones. He glanced at the window. Sunrise. The rapping came again. Charlotte, of course. She never seemed to tire. She never waited. "Coming," he groaned, rolling out of bed. He pulled on his dressing gown and dragged himself to the door. The moment he opened it, Charlotte swept past him as if she owned the place. She appeared well turned out despite the hour. Her hair fell about her shoulders in soft curls. Light rouge dusted her cheeks, and he caught the scent of orange blossom from her perfume. Suddenly aware that he was staring, he averted his gaze. "What brings you so early?" he asked. Charlotte smiled and raised an envelope. "A Halloween party on Osea Island, a weekend affair with ghost stories promised each night. You'll join me, won't you?" It wasn't really a question. She knew perfectly well that he would. Friday afternoon, Reginald stood at the edge of the quay, the steamer waiting where the black water opened wide. He watched the passengers gather and waited for Charlotte. They were headed to Harroway Hall, a grand private island estate, known for its labyrinthine gardens and the family's curious taste for secrecy. His gaze caught Gideon Harroway, red-haired, broad-shouldered, one of the Harroway triplets. It was a curious sight. The host should already be at the hall, yet one was crossing with the guests. It all became clear a moment later. A young woman stepped to Gideon's side, dark-haired, blue-eyed, and dressed with simple elegance. She slipped her hand through the crook of his arm, and he bent his head to listen as she spoke. Gideon was not travelling for duty, but for devotion. He was accompanying the fair Nora O'Connell, daughter of Cormac O'Connell, the Irish shipping man who had traded with the Harroways for years. Neither of the other triplets was in sight. Reginald's gaze shifted to a slight young woman fumbling with a leather satchel. A book slid free and tumbled to the planks. She bent to catch it, her spectacles sliding down her nose. Before she could reach it, a young man stepped forward and scooped it up. He returned it with a bow. "Miss Finch," he said, as though she had dropped it for his benefit. She thanked him, pushing her glasses back into place. Her coat and skirt were well made, but on her narrow frame they seemed too large, the sleeves and shoulders a fraction past her. The effect was not shabby but disproportionate, as though the clothes belonged to someone taller. Yet her hair was glossy and well set, and there was a quiet charm in her face that outshone the awkwardness. Reginald recalled the name. Octavia Finch, daughter of a wealthy family and childhood companion of Lydia Harroway. Her rescuer he knew well, Cyril Ashcroft, newly finished with his studies and on his way to becoming a barrister. Reginald caught sight of Charlotte coming across the quay as if the bustle had nothing to do with her. Her coat was buttoned neat, her hat set just so, her gloves to match. She carried no more than a small case, and even that looked like it belonged exactly where it was. She stopped at his side. "There you are. I half expected you'd find some excuse to stay behind." "And miss the chance to hear ghost stories on a private island in the company of half of London's finest? Hardly." He gave her his arm, and she accepted with a smile, carrying his own bag in the other hand. He led her up the gangway to the steamer. A crewman lifted their luggage, and Reginald led Charlotte to the rail. The water moved slowly beneath them, the quay still busy with trunks and voices. Charlotte looked toward a woman in black seated near the benches. A veil covered her face, but her laughter carried. "Corina Penrose," she said. "Widow, very wealthy, likes to be seen." Beside her sat a young man in uniform. "That's Algernon Beckett, Navy." To Reginald's eyes, the man looked unsteady, his brow damp, his posture held rigid. Before he could give it too much thought, a voice rang behind him. "Detective Faraday, from London." Reginald turned. A young man stood there, tall, his blonde hair smoothed flat, his suit cut to measure. "Yes?" Reginald said. "I thought so. The affair of the Gilded Mask was yours, wasn't it? I read it in the Illustrated London News. I make a point to never miss a report with your name attached." He offered his hand. "Erasmus Kent. If ever you need a physician's opinion, I consult at St. Thomas's." "Allow me to introduce Miss Charlotte, my companion for the crossing," Reginald said. Kent bowed his head. "An honour, Miss Charlotte." With a polite word of parting, he turned away, his eye caught by Octavia, the young woman with spectacles and a book in her lap. The last trunks were stowed, the lines cast off, and the steamer moved from the quay. The town fell away behind them. Charlotte rested her hands on the rail. "It will be good to see Julian, Lydia, and Gideon again. I do hope their father will be there as well. It has been years." Reginald remembered the man well enough. Bertram, an imposing man, loud in voice, bold in manner, shrewd at business. He had stood out in Parliament as well as in trade, a figure others deferred to. It struck Reginald now that he had not heard the name in years. Gideon Harroway rose from his seat and lifted his hand. "My friends," he announced, "I have news." He paused, reaching out his hand toward Nora, who took it and joined him. "Miss Nora O'Connell has agreed to be my wife." The deck filled with sounds of clapping and calls of congratulations. Nora's cheeks flushed as she smiled. The young woman in front of Reginald gasped and fell backwards. he managed to extend his arm just in time to catch her. He recognized her at once. Isadora Vale, a socialite and good friend of his former fiancée, Evelyn Redwin. As he lowered her to the deck, a crash rang out. Something glass had shattered. His head snapped toward the sound, and he caught sight of Algernon Beckett, the Navy man, grasping at his throat. The officer's face drained of colour, and he collapsed to the ground. Erasmus Kent was there at once, tending to him. "Well, that was not quite the reaction I expected," Gideon remarked. "I only meant to share an engagement." There was an uneasy burst of laughter, then quiet again. A tall, dark man pushed his way through the gathering. As he drew nearer, Reginald could see it was Edward Vale, Isadora's brother. He lifted his sister into his arms. "I will take her below," he said. Reginald stepped aside as Edward carried her toward the cabin. Charlotte moved toward Reginald. "What do you make of all that?" she asked. "A touch of the sea, perhaps," Reginald suggested. "Beckett was pale before. I noticed it." She nodded toward the physician, now crouched with 2 fingers at the man's throat. "By the looks of it, he's in safe hands," she said. Reginald didn't respond. The warmth in her tone and smile on her face sent a pang of jealousy through him. The rest of the crossing passed without incident. By late afternoon, the steamer drew alongside the island quay, and the passengers stepped ashore. The remaining 2 triplets waited at the end of the jetty. Julian Harroway was as tall as his brother, but his hair was darker and his jaw sharper. Though younger by minutes, he carried himself with a confidence that made him appear older. At his side was Lydia, shorter than her brothers but smartly dressed, high energy and outgoing. She went to each guest in turn, greeting them personally. Julian raised his hand in greeting. "Welcome to Osea," he called. Reginald and the other guests followed the siblings up the road. Gravel crunched underfoot, and the sea disappeared behind them. The house sat on the hill, built of red brick with chimneys rising above the roofline. Rows of windows, framed in white stone, faced the water. A broad staircase led up to a door flanked by columns. On either side stretched the gardens. The hedges were well manicured, their winding paths hidden from sight. More than one guest remarked that it was easy to lose one's way in them. At the top of the stairs, the doors were opened, and Reginald entered, Charlotte at his side. Servants came forward to take hats and coats. Isadora appeared with her brother, her arm linked through his. She looked stronger. Colour returned to her cheeks, though she still leaned on him. The naval officer was absent. Reginald supposed he had stayed with the boat, whether to return to London or to join them later. They were led to the drawing room. A table was laid with china cups, silver pots, and tiers of sandwiches and cakes. Servants moved between the chairs, pouring and passing plates. Reginald took a place near the window. Charlotte joined him. Erasmus Kent, the young physician, set his cup beside the detective's and sat down. A moment later, Sylvia Lane swept into the chair opposite him, accompanied by Julian Harroway. "My brother astonishes me," Julian said with a cheeky grin. "I had not thought Gideon would commit himself. He was always flitting about, surrounded by women with names you forgot the moment you heard them, if you catch my drift." "Nora's a sweet girl." Erasmus reached for a sandwich. "I had occasion to meet her last summer. Her father required a consultation. She made a strong impression. Gracious, sensible, quick to laugh. Gideon has done well." "She's a clear step up from the last lot," Sylvia smirked. "You should have seen the sorts he used to bring around. Some of them seemed more interested in his fortune than his affection." Reginald sipped his tea and stayed quiet. He had never felt at ease in rooms like this. It puzzled him the way people spoke about their own friends when those friends weren't present. Everyone at the table seemed fond of Gideon, yet here they were, stripping his past bare for amusement. He could follow the rhythm of it, but not the purpose. Charlotte, by contrast, looked perfectly at ease. She sipped from her cup and smiled at the right moments, the picture of good company. "I expect your father must be pleased," she said. Julian paused. A forced smile spread across his face. Yes, I imagine he is, he said, reaching for a biscuit. Will the wedding be held here at the hall? Charlotte asked. It's such a beautiful property, I can't imagine a finer setting. Before he could answer, the clink of a fork tapping glass rang out across the space. Lydia stood at the front of the room. You were promised ghost stories, she smiled. I'll go first. Conversation halted at once. Cups were set down. People leaned forward. This is what they'd come for, and they stilled, waiting. I heard this one as a child, told to me by the old housekeeper. She swore up and down it was true, and she wasn't the only one to say so, she began. This very island once harboured a dark secret during the plague years of 1665. A physician came here, claiming he could cure the pestilence that was ravaging London. He wore a long black robe, leather gloves, and that terrible beaked mask filled with herbs. Her voice dropped low, and her eyes scanned the guests. He stayed at the hall, in the East Wing. The wealthy sent their afflicted here, paying handsomely for his promised cure. But the doctor was no healer. He was a charlatan who let the sick die while he robbed them of their gold and jewellery. He buried the bodies in the maze of hedges that surround the property and told the families they had fled in shame. When the truth came to light, the villagers hunted him down. They found him in the cellar, packing his cases. He was dragged outside and burned alive. They say the smoke hung over the island for days. After that, the sightings began. A figure walking the hedgerow in the dark. The glint of a beaked mask in the moonlight. A sound of coins hitting the marble floor. Some say he only comes for those who've grown rich by deceit. He gives them a choice. Confess their wrongdoing or join him. His soul remains trapped here, forever bound to the grounds with no peace and no end. Julian raised his glass. A strong start, he called out. Well done, Lydia. Applause followed. A few guests called out their approval. Julian looked around the table. She's been storing up tales like that since we were children. The housekeeper used to fill her head with them. I expect she'll keep us going the whole time. He reached for a sandwich. There'll be some scares before the weekend is through, I promise you that. By nightfall, a full moon rode high above the hall. Fog drifted in from the water and lay thick across the gardens. Burning lanterns bordered the paths, and music carried through the corridors as the guests arrived in masks and costume. Reginald had given in to the spirit of the thing and wore a plain mask with a dark coat and tricorn hat. Charlotte, on the other hand, went all out. She swept toward him in a gown of silver, her mask set with pearls. He caught her signature scent of orange blossom as she approached. You look very fine, he said. She smiled at his compliment. Thank you, and that hat suits you. At last, something to keep your unruly hair under control. Other guests had gone even further. The Harroway triplets drew the most attention, costumed as if they had stepped straight from a playhouse. They had dressed as a matched set of musketeers, Gideon in scarlet, Julian in green, Lydia in blue, each with a white lawn shirt beneath. Their leather boots looked fresh from the maker, and their hat brims swept in dramatic curves, with feathers as tall as walking sticks rising from the bands. Golden thread embroidered their cuffs, and their sword hilts were wrapped in matching ribbon. They were exquisite pieces meant to be seen. Sylvia Lane shone almost as brightly. Her gown was cut in the Renaissance style, with a square neckline, fitted bodice, flowing skirt, and a jewelled girdle at the waist. Burgundy ribbons tied back her hair, and her mask glittered with stones. She spoke with wide gestures, flashing the rings on her fingers, and wherever she lingered, the conversation bent toward her. Nora O'Connell was a softer sight. She had chosen a gown of cream silk in the Grecian style, a gilt cord tied around her waist. Her mask was plain ivory, and her hair was fastened with a single comb. But it was Algernon Beckett who caught Reginald's eye. His strength seemed to have returned since the voyage. His walk was confident, his colour sound. He had chosen a long black robe that fell to his boots, with only a strip of cloth across his eyes for a mask. He walked with his head low, speaking to no one as he moved across the ballroom. "Miss Charlotte, you look radiant this evening." The familiar voice pulled Reginald's attention. Erasmus Kent stood beside them in a tailored coat edged with silver braid. A simple half mask in the same shade crossed his eyes. His fair hair had been brushed neatly back, giving him a polished air. "Silver suits you better than me," Kent said. Charlotte flashed him a smile. "Thank you, Doctor." "May I have this dance?" he asked, offering his hand. She placed her fingers in his, and together they moved toward the floor. Reginald turned his attention back to the ballroom, but Beckett was gone. His eyes trailed to Charlotte. Erasmus led her effortlessly through the dance. He was struck by how gracefully she moved. It occurred to him that she was good at practically everything. He felt heat rising up the back of his neck and his cheeks flush. It suddenly became rather hot, and he needed some air. Stepping out of the ballroom, he made his way into the hall. At the front doors, he paused as Edward Vale entered with his sister Isadora on his arm. Edward wore a black domino cloak over his suit, a simple half-mask over his eyes. Isadora's gown was a deep red satin, her sleeves full at the shoulder and close at the wrist. A lace mask framed her face. She gave Reginald a polite nod before Edward guided her inside. Reginald tipped his head in response and continued on through the doorway and out to the terrace. Stone steps led down to a gravel path. Fog blanketed the ground, muting the glow of the lanterns. The night air cooled his face. He pulled off his hat and gave himself a quick fan with it. Suddenly, he became aware of a figure standing by the hedge. By her uniform, it was a housemaid crying, her apron twisted in her hands. He stepped toward her. "Are you unwell, miss? Do you need assistance?" She straightened at once, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. "No, sir, thank you." "Shall I fetch you water?" "No, thank you." She ran her hands over her apron, smoothing it flat, then started up the steps. At the door, she turned back. "Be careful who you trust," she said, and went inside. What could that mean? Before he had time to dwell on it, he noticed something near the hedge. A crumpled paper lay on the ground. He stooped, picked it up, and saw it was a letter. The fold creased and softened from handling. Perhaps the maid dropped it. He smoothed the page against his knee and read it. "My dear Lizette, I cannot keep my promise to you, and I regret it. To continue as we were would be folly. I cannot acknowledge what has passed between us. I beg you to think no more of me. It is better this way." There was no signature. He refolded the letter and slipped it into his pocket. It was plainly meant for someone named Lizette, though he had no idea who in the household bore that name. It could have been the housemaid with the cryptic message, or someone else entirely, better kept than left on the path. He set his hat back on his head and climbed the steps. Raised voices echoed from somewhere inside. He paused at the doorway, listening. The sounds came from down the hall, behind one of the closed doors. A woman's voice, sharp and angry. A man's, lower, but equally heated. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. A quarrel, and not a gentle one. He moved quietly down the corridor, drawn by the intensity of the exchange. The voices grew clearer as he approached. "Cannot continue this way," the man was saying. "You knew the terms," came the woman's reply. The sound of the doorknob turning sent Reginald quickly around the corner. He pressed himself against the wall, listening to footsteps approach. A man emerged and strode past without noticing him. tall with black hair and a square jaw that looked like it had seen its share of trouble. Scars marked his forehead and left cheek, and when his hands swung at his sides, Reginald caught the sight of more scarring across the knuckles. The man disappeared toward the main hall. Reginald waited a moment, then stepped toward the open doorway and peered inside. Isadora Vale stood with her back to him, adjusting her red satin gown. She must have sensed his presence because she turned, but her eyes passed over him as if he weren't there. Without a word, she swept past him and out of the room. "There you are," a voice behind him said. "I was beginning to think you'd snuck away on the last boat," said Charlotte. "I was exploring," he said, which wasn't entirely untrue. "Did you see a man pass by? Tall, facial scars, dark hair?" "Sounds like Julian's assistant," she said. "Balthazar. Why do you ask?" "No reason," he said. "You were looking for me?" "The musicians are starting a new set," Charlotte replied. "You'll dance with me, won't you?" "You know I'm no dancer." "It's only a line," she said, taking his hand before he could object. "All you have to do is follow my lead." He let himself be drawn into the set. The steps were simple enough, and with Charlotte guiding him, he found his rhythm. After that, the party seemed almost easy, the night alive with music and laughter. Sometime later, the dancing gave way to quieter conversation. Guests drifted into smaller groups. Candles burned lower. Plates of cake were passed around, and tea was laid out on silver trays. "It's near midnight," Charlotte said, glancing at the tall clock in the corner. "Lydia promised more ghost stories, and I had expected some mischief by now, a fright or two at least." The last word had scarcely left her when a scream rang out from the side garden. A second followed from the far side of the house. Then a third from the back. Charlotte set down her plate at once and rose with Reginald, the room breaking into confusion around them. "There you are, then," Reginald said. "Do you suppose it's part of the entertainment?" she asked. "Seems fitting for a Halloween affair," he answered. They remained still, listening. Their eyes scanned the hall. A footman burst in through the side door. His face was drained of colour, his hands shaking. Doctor, quick! There's a woman in the garden! She's hurt!" he yelled. They looked about for Erasmus. For a moment he was nowhere to be seen. Then he came through the crowd and went out the door with the footman. Reginald and Charlotte followed close behind. They reached the side garden. Near the tall hedges a figure lay in the grass. Erasmus knelt, rolled her gently onto her back, and pressed his fingers against her throat. He bent close, listening, then drew back. "She's dead," he said. Another servant came running, her eyes wide. "Help! There's a body in the far garden!" Charlotte turned to Reginald. "I'll go. Stay here." Reginald and Erasmus followed the woman through the hall and out into the garden on the far side of the house. A woman lay on the ground, her dress plain, a dark uniform but without an apron, a housemaid. Erasmus knelt beside her, pressed his fingers at her throat, then leaned close. After a moment, he looked up. "She's dead," he confirmed. Julian burst into the garden, his green costume in disarray, the sash twisted across his chest and the plume of his hat bent. His face was flushed. "Help me," he said. "I cannot find Nora. She is gone." "Gone?" Reginald asked. "She said she was going to her room to fetch something and did not return. After a time I went to look for her. She was not there." Reginald thought of the third scream. He turned to Erasmus. "We should check the back of the house." He looked up and saw the butler standing among the gathering guests. "See that no one touches the body," he told the man. The butler bowed his head. "Of course, sir." Reginald turned back to Julian and Erasmus. Together they made for the rear of the house. The fog was heavier there, the lanterns giving little light. It was hard to see more than a few steps ahead. "Nora!" they called. The hedges rose 10 feet high, their paths winding between walls of leaves. Thick fog drifted across the ground, and the few lanterns barely cut through the midnight darkness. "We'll cover more ground apart," Reginald said. Julian nodded and hurried down one passage, Erasmus another, Reginald turning into a third, the mist swirling around him. "Nora!" His voice was swallowed by the maze. He stopped, listening. Nothing. His narrowed eyes trying to see further than the fog would allow. His steps were slow, careful as he navigated the maze of hedges. "Nora!" he continued to call. In the distance, he could hear Julian and Erasmus calling for her as well. The mist ahead of him began to stir. Reginald stopped where he was. He shifted again, pulling back in a slow, steady drift. He felt the hair rise at the back of his neck. "Grandfather?" he whispered. The fog split and drew apart on either side like curtains opening. Percival's ghostly hands, he was sure of it. "Thank you," he mouthed. He stepped forward, one hand brushing the hedge to steady himself. Then he saw it. A length of silk lay across the path ahead. Pale, Grecian folds spread in the dirt. "Here!" he yelled out. "I found something!" Erasmus appeared first. Reginald pointed down the path. "There!" The physician dropped to his knee beside the figure and bent low. His hand went to her throat, then to her chest. Julian appeared as Erasmus drew back. "It is Nora," the physician said. "She is dead." Julian froze, his eyes fixed on the gown in the dirt. He did not move when Erasmus spoke. "Stay with her," Reginald told the physician. He took Julian by the arm and guided him back through the garden and into the hall. A chair stood empty near the wall, and Reginald eased him into it. The guests had gathered in clusters, their voices low. Across the room, Reginald saw Algernon Beckett. He caught the officer's eye and beckoned him over. When Beckett bent close, Reginald spoke low. "We are dealing with 3 murders. Can you see the room cleared?" The Navy man nodded and took control of the crowd. Lydia hurried to Julian's side. "Are you all right? You look dreadful." "He's had a fright," Reginald said. "Stay with him a while, will you?" "Of course," she said, taking Julian's hand in hers. Reginald left them and went out to the side garden. Charlotte was waiting there with the first body. The woman lay where she had fallen. Reginald bent closer. He had not seen her before, likely one of the housemaids. "She's been stabbed," Charlotte said quietly. "They will need to carry her in," he said. "They cannot leave her out here. I'll fetch the butler." "There will not be another boat until Sunday," Charlotte added. "We are stuck here until then." Reginald crossed the garden to where the butler still stood watch over the second maid. "I am sorry to trouble you," he said, lowering his voice, "but it appears that we have 3 victims. They must not remain where they are. Will you see that sheets are brought and men to carry them inside?" The butler inclined his head. "At once, sir." He disappeared into the house. Reginald looked down at the woman at his feet. She had been stabbed, a single wound visible in her chest. The 3 bodies were carried in and laid out on sheets in the servants' hall. The long table had been pushed against the wall to make space. Erasmus moved from one victim to the next. Gideon Harroway was there as well. He leaned against the wall with his arms folded. "All dead, all stabbed, and within the last hour," Erasmus concluded. "Defensive wounds?" Reginald added. The physician shook his head. "No broken nails, no wounds on the hand. I'd say they were taken by surprise." Reginald turned to Gideon. "The authorities must be informed without delay. Might I ask that you see to it?" Gideon nodded. "We've a wire in the steward's office, but it is fickle in heavy fog. I'll have the steward send a boat across to the mainland at first light. That will be the surer way." "Yes, that is best," Reginald agreed. A knock sounded at the door. Beckett stood in the hall, his robe drawn close, his mask removed. "Faraday, I've 3 witnesses." Reginald followed him out. 3 stood waiting, 2 women still in costume and a footman, his face flushed from running. The first spoke quickly, wringing her gloves. "I was in the garden nearest the hedge. I saw him, a dark cloak, a mask with a beak. His boots made an awful sound on the gravel. It still echoes through my bones." The footman lifted his chin. "I saw the same, a cloak to the ground, black boots. There was a tear in the seam, high on the right side." The third woman added, "Yes, that's the same figure I glimpsed behind the house, near the maze. Same cloak, same mask, same tear in the seam." Reginald looked from one to the next. "You are certain it was the same man?" They all nodded. "What time was this?" "Just before midnight," the first woman said. "Yes, it was before the clock struck nearly 12, the footman agreed. He'd seen the figure slightly before midnight and heard a scream within minutes. The silence fell over the group. One witness had seen him in the far garden, another at the side, a third at the back, all at that same moment. "One man cannot be in 3 places, not living," the first woman cried, crossing herself. The footman raised his voice. "It was the spectre, just like Miss Lydia's story." Reginald lifted a hand. "You have done right to speak plainly. Leave the rest to me. Whatever was seen tonight, I will see it accounted for. Until then, keep your counsel. No good will come of frightening the others." He looked from one face to the next. "Trust that I will see the matter through. That is my charge, not yours. See them settled, Mr. Beckett. Keep them together in the main hall and let no story grow beyond what they've already told. I'll not have the house in a panic before dawn." Beckett nodded. "You may rely on me." Reginald left him to it and pushed the door open again, stepping back into the room where the 3 bodies lay. Drawing out his notebook, he crouched beside each in turn and began to write. 3 women, heights and builds alike. 2 in service dress. 1 Miss O'Connell, stab wounds. 1 with 3, others single. No defence found. Time of death, near midnight. He closed the book with a snap and slipped it back into his pocket. Straightening, he turned to go. And stopped. It was like walking into a wall, only colder. Percival, the ghost, held him in place. Reginald clenched his jaw. "Are you unwell?" Erasmus asked, eyeing him. Reginald cleared his throat. "I think I'd better take another look." At once the pressure lifted. He turned back to the row of sheets and bent over the bodies again. There had to be something he missed. He scanned their faces, but nothing stood out. His eyes moved to their hands, but he agreed with the physician's conclusions. No broken nails, no defensive wounds. Then he saw it. There are 3 witnesses in the main hall who swear one spectre killed these 3 women all at midnight. But look here. He gestured toward the stab wounds on one of the women. Erasmus drew near. "I believe I've solved this mystery," Reginald said. The guests were assembled in the ballroom, their costumes now dishevelled and wrinkled. Abandoned masks littered the tables. Heavy eyelids and yawns signalled that few of them had slept. The triplets were present, Lydia's head resting on Gideon's shoulder. Isadora sat near the window, her gloved hands resting in her lap. Her brother, Edward, seated behind. Navy man Beckett stood guard at the door, Erasmus by his side. Reginald waited by the hearth. Once they were all settled, he spoke. "Let us begin with what we know," he began. "There are 3 victims, all women, all killed within the hour before midnight. 2 were servants, 1 was Miss O'Connell." He paused. "Each was stabbed, 2 suffered a single wound, 1 was struck thrice. No signs of a struggle. They never had the chance." A man's voice cut through the quiet. "It was the spectre, I tell you. You've heard the tale. He was seen in every garden, all at once. No living man could do such a thing." "That's right. He was wearing the cloak and the mask, same as the doctor in the story. It had to be him." Several voices rose in quick agreement. Reginald lifted his hand. The room quieted. "That's precisely what the killers intended you to believe." He clasped his hands behind his back and began pacing. "I put it to you that there were 3 killers, each dressed alike, each striking at the stroke of midnight." The footman stood. "It was one man. We all saw the tear in the seam, the mask, the boots. It was the same individual." "Part of the deception," the detective answered. "A ruse carefully constructed by 3 conspirators." "Then it was the triplets," one of the guests asserted. "They're behind it." "That's right," another said. "It's their estate and all the victims were linked to them. No one here had cause to kill housemaids." "You're quite right," Reginald nodded. "But ask yourselves, who was the intended victim?" He paused. "Nora," Julian replied. "Why would anyone target her?" "Jealousy," Reginald answered. "Prior to your engagement, you kept the company of many women." He removed a folded piece of paper from his coat and handed it to the man. Julian's eyes moved across the page. His face sank. He folded it and handed it back to the detective. "That's your handwriting, is it not?" Reginald asked. Julian nodded and sank back into his chair. "Earlier in the evening, I overheard a fight between 2 guests, Isadora Vale and a man I did not recognize at the time, but I now know to be Balthazar Grimsby, Julian's assistant." Gasps erupted from the group. Isadora jumped to her feet. "You're not blaming me for this," she spat. "Oh, but I am," Reginald confirmed. "You, your brother Edward, and Mr. Balthazar Grimsby." "You have no proof," Edward retorted, moving to his sister's side. "On the contrary," said Reginald, "there is evidence. Allow me to explain how the murders unfolded. Balthazar is not merely Julian's assistant, he is also your secret lover. The relationship was kept quiet, naturally, since you were hoping for Julian's proposal. When Balthazar learned of the pending engagement to Nora, he told you. You were furious. You believed that, without Nora, Julian might still choose you." Isadora didn't answer. Her cheeks grew red, and her hands began to shake. "You fainted when he announced his engagement. Hearing the words spoken overwhelmed you," he said. "But you couldn't simply murder her, not if you hoped to remain a suitable bride. So, with Balthazar and Edward, you devised a scheme. Balthazar, having spent years in Julian's company, has heard Lydia's ghost stories time and again. The legend of the plague doctor provided the perfect cover. You procured 3 identical masks, 3 cloaks, 3 pairs of boots. You even tore each in the same spot, under the right arm, to lend credence to the illusion of a single killer." Isadora laughed angrily. "You've nothing but speculation." "I'm not finished." Reginald resumed his pacing. "I examined the bodies. One of the maids had been stabbed by a left-handed individual. The wound was on her right side." He turned to Balthazar. "Hold up your left hand." "And why should he?" Isadora objected. "He can do it for me, or he can do it for the constables when they arrive," Reginald replied. Balthazar hesitated, then stepped forward and raised his left hand. "Scars," the detective observed, "from having the knuckles wrapped in school for using the wrong hand to write." "Even if he is left-handed, that proves nothing." Isadora remained defiant. "It proves there was more than one killer." Reginald approached her. "You killed Nora, but the other 2 were distractions meant to make it seem as though a lone madman struck thrice. But your rage betrayed you. The 2 housemaids were stabbed once. Nora was stabbed 3 times. You wanted to be certain she died. She was the target." "That still isn't evidence," she scoffed. "You weren't wearing gloves when you arrived this evening. I passed you in the hall as you entered. Yet you wear them now." He stepped forward and took her wrist. "Stop!" she shrieked. "What do you think you're doing?" He pulled the glove from her right hand, and there was a fresh wound, a slice across her palm, still red. "A slip of the knife?" Reginald asked. "Blood is a slippery business. It's not uncommon for murderers to injure themselves in the act." "I've heard enough," Gideon stepped forward. "The three of you are being detained until the police arrive in the morning." He turned to Reginald. "Fine work, detective." Charlotte approached. "Indeed, most impressive," she smiled. Reginald exhaled. "I'll be glad to board that boat come Sunday. I've had quite enough of Osea Island." "We won't be on that steamer," she replied. "What do you mean?" he asked. "I haven't told you everything," she said. "I didn't invite you here merely for Halloween revelry and frightful stories. I'm working a case. You'll assist me, won't you?" She knew perfectly well that he would.